give back in multiples. And that's going to be one of the big themes that we're going to talk about today. So I was going to suggest that as we start off, you'll all notice that live feed that we have of the blue oak, the chêne bleu, that gave its name to our wine. And you can see it there in the background. It lost its leaves and we painted it with copper sulfide. And then it really stood out because it has such an important location right at the edge of this forest, of the medieval vegetable garden, of the vineyard that we've restored with very ancient vines, which he's going to talk about a little bit in a second of how he came across this place. And lastly, we have these beehives that are part of a very important sustainability project, which we'll talk about as well. So maybe to kick you off, why don't we tell you a little bit more about where we are. We're in the south of France, but we're on the same latitude as Châteauneuf-du-Pape, way up in the mountains, with a very pronounced altitude. So Xavier, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you came across this place?
Yes, of course. Hello everyone, and welcome to our little podcast. This came out really as one of these little stories that you wouldn't believe, but many years ago in the early 90s, I found I'd been looking for such a property for some time, and I saw on the window of a very tiny real estate agency an old sepia-colored Polaroid, and that was it. There was no description, no price, just the picture of a very old, decrepit estate on a small standard Polaroid. And I walked into the real estate shop, and some really old man, he was probably in his early 80s, came out of the back room, greeted me with some hesitant words. And I said, could I see this property, the details on that property? And he said, I'm not really sure. This has been there a very long time. And he went back into his back room, couldn't really locate it. So in the end, I left him my card. And he did call about a week later saying, I actually have found the details about this property, but you may not want to look at it. There's no water, there's no electricity. It's been on the market. I'm not the primary listing firms, and it's been on the market a long time. Anyway, I ended up being able to see it, bid way down the offer price, because I thought the location, the terroir, as we say in French, but also the geology of the area and its history, although it hasn't featured in any history books about the history of the country or the region, but it did have traces of ancient history linked to monks, to Templars who used it as fortified it as one of their location from which they could protect pilgrims traveling down to the Med on their way to the Holy Land against incursions from essentially bandits from the mountains. So a little bit of history over the years. I bid 50% below the offered price, and before I knew it, I owned the place. And I think essentially, the last 30 years or so have been spent bringing back this gem of a property, perhaps not to its former glory, because it never had any, but to its connectivity, its sense of connection with the past, with its geology, with its history as a wine producing, extremely rustic, of course, since the property is over 1,000 years old. But there are traces of very old stone cut wine fermentation tanks. So that history is now being rebuilt, reconnected, but also because of its location, very specific geological environment, which is now part of a protected UNESCO biosphere. High up in the elevation, we're situated by a limestone outcrop called the Dentelle de Montmirail, Montmirail comes from Latin Mons Mirabilis, which means beautiful mountain. It's indeed a beautiful spot. But we also have the advantage of being protected, if you want, from sort of the more traditional agricultural practices lower down in the valley. Where at times regrettably chemicals are being used or sort of modern agricultural practices. So we had the opportunity to attempt an experiment because of our altitude and isolation to look at doing several things. First of all, eschewing traditional methods of chemical cultivation. And we, as early as we could, switch to biodynamic cultivation. Secondly, analyzing more deeply the geological potential, which is quite complex, because as Nicole perhaps can also explain, we're right at the edge of tectonic plates, where the North African plate, which actually lies under the Western Mediterranean, pushes into the Eurasian, into the European plates. And so we have a complement of deep basalts, magmatic layers, Triassic, Jurassic, which converts into fairly unique mineral opportunities if you operate your vineyards with small blocks and are careful about matching the geological components and substrate with the particular plants and vines that you're going to cultivate. And then finally, because the environment had been neglected, frankly, the property had been abandoned for several decades, leveraging this unique environment, terroir, as the French say, which is a combination of the pedology, the geology, the weather, the human environment, the natural environment, into a unique product where we were not at the beginning certain that we wanted to operate under the specific French so-called appellation, which is an IGP. It's an area of where location determines the particular vines you can plant, because we're so much higher up than all our neighbors. In fact, we're one of the highest altitude vineyards in the southeast of France. But we did look at the very specific conditions and decided we want to be free. We wanted to be free to plant whichever wines and vines best suited the environment, blend it according to what we thought, what our winemaker, our consultant also advised us from all over the world, by the way, from California to, of course, France and other areas. So we wanted to create something unique that would connect us with the geology, with the past, with the pristine natural condition. The place is actually being turned into a park, national park at the moment, the whole area, because of the unique features of its fauna and flora, to create a unique product that we could really run the way we wanted. We would focus on actually what's in the bottle and not being constrained in a good or bad way, but not being constrained by the limitations of a system which was designed for viticultural practices that really belong down to the Rhone Valley, where, for those of you who know the area, the properties essentially very, very large. And you can't see a blade of grass, you can't see much nature, butterflies. We have over 1,200 species of butterfly where we are, raptors, birds, wildlife are back. We wanted that very complex, diverse, biological complex, and didn't want that sort of monocultural, extensive type of wine farming that you can see in the lower reaches of the Rhone Valley, where the potential is high. So ultimately, and I'll conclude there, we saw very quickly, Nicole and I and the team, that we had a combination of the richness of the southern Rhone in terms of the weather, but thanks to altitude, geological complexity, we could also have a very high amplitude, very high delta between the coolest temperatures at night, even in the middle of summer, and the warmest temperatures during the middle of the day, which would allow late ripening, slow ripening, so that we could maintain, combine, if you want, blend the aromas of the Southern Rhone with the subtlety, the acidity, the complexity of the northern Rhone, which of course is much closer to the Alps and higher in altitude. So that's in a nutshell. Sorry to make this a long-winded introduction. There's a lot in this. You can dig for hours and days and weeks if you seek to dig into the richness of the historical past, the geological past, as well as the natural environment, which is fairly unique. But also with the team, Jean-Louis, my brother-in-law, and my sister and the team, Brian, and many others, some of them are here today on the line, have been able to create. Terroir does give a major part to the human environment as well. And we've tried very, very hard. There's been a lot of sweat, blood, and tears attached to it, and some treasure as well, to create a biodynamic product that reflects the pristine nature of this natural environment. So that would be my few words of introduction. Perhaps Nicole want to take over from there, or we'll take any questions if you have any.
So I thank you, Xavier. That's great because you covered a lot of ground for us. And what I'll do is I'll maybe stop screen sharing. But before I do, I'm going to show you the inside of the house when he found it. It was all covered with vines, and there were 2 meters of petrified sheep dung growing there, and a big fig tree growing through to the sky. So I hope you got a little live feed there. At one point, I think it cut off a bit from the historical part, but just that took us 12 years. Renovating the vineyard took us 12 years. This is not for the faint of heart, but the great opportunity here, and I know that having, all being so well traveled and being part of this international community of people with big projects and big ideas, you can really understand this more than some other people, is this opportunity to take this best of culture from all these different influences, from all these different wine regions, different areas of thought, and bring them all to bear in one specific place with an incredible natural terroir. We talked about that amazing altitude. There's very, very specific geology, which is very exciting. We can come back to if you're interested, but that's crucial. There's this amazing microbiome, which we'll talk about if you're interested in the sustainability work that we're doing, which is very cutting edge, and we hope will be a big roadmap for other people hoping to launch themselves in these projects for the future. I think it's going to be crucial. And lastly, that huge history, to be the guardians of something that's more than 1,000 years old. And interestingly, when I first came to get involved in this project, and when I started traveling to Asia to sell these wines, I felt so much connection there. And I know all of you that are based in Asia probably can understand this, that just like here, there's this constant pressure, challenge to reconcile an extremely old, exciting, important baggage of history and culture, but also to adopt the new, interesting, innovative ways of thinking and doing things, and being respectful of that tension, that juxtaposition, that contradiction that comes from those forces is at the heart of the wines that we make. And so the other thing that I think is very interesting, and we're going to be able to see it stylistically. Let me see if we have our live feed from the winery. I think we lost her for a while. Okay, there she is. She's been showing us a little bit around the most ancient parts here. You can see after the photos I showed you of how it used to be, maybe get a glimpse of what it's like nowadays. It looks like she's having some Wi-Fi challenges. Sorry, Camille. So as you watch the feed, she's going to head back up to the winery now, and as we do, I'll tell you how that interacted with us. For us, the ability to have those 1,000 years of history meant that a lot of our wines are based around that medieval identity. And so you will find that our 2 flagship reds that you will be trying today, if you have the wines, are called Abelard and Eloise. after the most famous French lovers. Now, some of you may have heard of Abelard and Heloise. They're very well known in France. They're a lot less known in outside of France, but they were more famous than Romeo and Juliet because they were real people. Now, I know many cultures have famous lovers, and Camille, we're going to go through the side door, I think, so we don't lose you. Um, uh, and uh, and so with Abelard and Heloise, we have a situation that will show you again the two faces of the winery, the very masculine, muscular on one side, this kind of feminine elegance, restraint, but again, playing around with tension, juxtaposition between different identities and finding that sweet spot where they interact with each other. So now we're going into the side door of the winery, and we're getting a little glimpse of these tanks. So these are the wooden fermentation vessels, and we'll take a quick look at the other stainless steels there, and we'll talk a little bit about why we have so many small tanks of different styles when we come back down. So maybe Xavier, while she's taking you to the top level, you want to tell us a little bit about why you designed this as a gravity-fed winery? Xavier, we can hear you.
Yep. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, we can. Do you want to tell us a little bit?
Yes, certainly. The concept of a gravity-fed winery is really important in chemistry as it relates to oxidation. Wineries say where everything is built so ranch style on a single ground, you need to transfer what comes out, for example, of the fermentation tanks into the resting tanks. We go through two basic fermentation process: alcoholic fermentation first, and then malolactic fermentation. And then often you have a blending process, and you need to move your wine into different tanks, and then eventually to casks, and then into the bottle. Where in an environment where the winery is built on a single layer, a single floor, the only way, obviously, to move the wine or the unfinished wine, if you want at various steps in the process, is to use pumps. Most wineries, unfortunately, use traditional pumps that use essentially a vortex process, mini vortex, to move the liquid from one area to another. Some others will use a peristaltic pump, which is actually a less disruptive pump in the sense that it slowly moves the wine into pipes, without the vortex effect. The problem with pumping, even if you use a better quality pump like peristaltic, which are very heavy and very expensive as well to own as well as maintain, is that they can contribute to the oxidation, the early oxidation of the wine at a time where you should be focusing on other things, on resting, or alcoholic fermentation, malolactic fermentation. And so whilst it's easier, obviously, in terms of day-to-day management to operate everything on the same ground, it does impact the quality of the wine. And typically a high-end premium winery, super premium winery, will seek to use gravity, i.e. having several floors, which is what we did at La Verrière. We dug a 40-foot deep hole in order to build 3 floors. It's all it's the environmental as well as aesthetic exigencies of the area. We didn't want a tall building in the middle of a nature preserve that would exceed the existing medieval priory that was already there. So we dug everything into the hill. It's all rocks, as you can imagine. It was neither easy, fast, nor cheap. But in the end, we have a gravity environment where we can move the liquid from the top floor to the second floor to the third floor, the deepest floor, deep in the hill, where the maturation in oak casks happen without the use of pumps and without the early oxidation of the liquid. So that's the long story behind the reason why we use gravity.
I'm going to interrupt you 1 second because I don't know if you can see the live feed from the winery. If you can see that, I just wanted to point out to everybody as we're going by, this is a perfect opportunity because we happen to be doing a big bottling today. Xavier, can you see it now? And
Yes, I can.
Great. So this doesn't happen many times a year. Good timing. So that's my sister-in-law, that is Xavier's sister Benedict that we saw a minute ago, and their son Hugo, who works in the winery with us. Patti, this is a very active moment right here because bottling is a very fiddly, difficult part of the process. So I just thought it was nice to digress a little bit on that. So we're gonna now, let's see if was that Jean-Louis who went by? Can we say hi to Jean-Louis, my brother-in-law, who's the winemaker? Jean-Louis. Yeah, live to Singapore. There he is, very busy. So we'll leave him to his activities. So these mobile bottling units are super helpful. They're a game changer for small wineries because back to what Xavier said about oxygen management, bottling is a really tricky, treacherous part of the process. So as we go down to the barrel room, we're going to see on our left there, we're noticing these tanks that have a strange band around them. If you visited wineries before, you may or may not have seen or noticed those bands. Those are crucial because they are the ones that provide the ability to bring temperature control, which along with oxygen management that he mentioned, is the second most essential and revolutionary thing that's been happening in winemaking. Many of you may have heard in the past that wines from hot countries can be a bit heavy and rustic and alcoholic, but actually this integration of refrigeration, which has only been introduced into wineries in the last 15, 20 years, is what's making the huge difference. When you visit wineries around the world, they might say to you, oh, it's the new generation, they're so much more ambitious than their parents, etc. Well, actually, it is not possible in a hot climate to make elegant, sophisticated wines unless you have the right tools. So we're gonna head in quickly to the barrel room, take a quick peek up there, and come up for a quick tasting and then some Q&A. We may have lost Camille temporarily. Actually, I think we probably have, but probably the Wi-Fi is not hooked on there while they're doing these other things. Oh well, let's keep talking. She's going to be coming up to the tasting room in a second. And while we're finishing up on the winery, there she is, popping us into the barrel room 1 second. There's the VIP tasting room. If any of you ever come to visit us, I will make sure that you get set up with the VIP tasting because that's we have some very old vintages that are fun to go through. So now we're gonna recommend that you take your wines and get you set up with the first one, which we like to start with the rosé as the first wine we're gonna taste today. So I'm taking you over to our little tasting area. So here we have, we've set it up with all the different wines here. I'm going to take you through the wines because Xavier doesn't have all of them with him, but he was very much involved with the conception of the different ways of showcasing this vineyard. So over here, we have the rosé. So please take your rosé, and everyone has probably had some kind of wine tasting experience before. But I'd like you to start with some of the technical ways that the pros always use when they want to compare and contrast wine. So the first thing I recommend is always swirl the wine on the table, not up in the air like this. You have a lot more control over your swirl. The next thing that often we like to do is look at these sticky legs of glycerol, which are on the side of your glass. So hold it up to the light, and you'll typically see some nice, lovely, sticky residue. That, of course, is something you don't typically see on a rosé. Most rosés, if you do that, they look like your water glass. You just see little stars on the side. You don't see that lovely texture. So right away, before you've even smelled it or tasted it, you can imagine that this is going to be a very good food wine. Why is that? because that texture, that glycerol, that's going to give that lovely mouthfeel when you have it with food. So this is the new generation of rosés, the kinds that you can have all year with food, not just on a hot day on a terrace or by a swimming pool. And we are part of that vanguard, showing that you can make a rosé that can smell and taste very nice, but also is going to have the texture, the length, the finish, the minerality, the structure, the balance, the food friendliness that you would associate with a different kind of wine. So apparently you can't hear me as well as you'd like, so I'm going to see if I can move that a bit closer. Not so easy to do. I'll try to move myself closer. So here we go. Let's take our little swig. And as you try it, smell if you can get first all those lovely berry smells and red fruits, because that's a Grenache base with some Syrah, a nice Syrah backbone. But then see if you can pick up some floral notes as well. Those are coming from the Cinsault, which is very floral, and a little bit from the white wine we use called Vermentino, which is Rolle. And then some lovely spice, especially in the palate, which comes from the Mourvèdre. So if I'm making a complex blend, every year we try to make this more and more sophisticated. And then a couple of years ago, it was validated as when it came in #1 in the world in the most competitive rosé tasting. So this is a wine that that should taste and age very well. It's great for food pairing, but there's one more secret to it, which I think is extremely important, and I hope you will all start paying more and more attention to as you know more about wine. And that is the whole sustainability issue and all the work we do not to use chemicals. Chemicals are so prevalent in winemaking these days. It is a scandal, an accident waiting to happen. There's been so much lobbying to governments not to reveal all the ingredients in a wine. I can't even go to a corner shop to buy a bottle, to buy a sandwich without seeing everything that's in it. And yet in wine, we withhold that information from you as consumers because we want to be able to use all sorts of tricks of the trade. And these kinds of wines, especially rosé, it's become like Photoshop. It's very little to do with the original juice. So the reason that's important now is that we found a way to make this without chemicals in the vineyard, but also in the winery, we do not use tartric acid like most people. And also for the fining, almost everybody who makes rosé uses something called PVPP, which is a petrochemical derivative. And it's a form of plastic. So we found a way to swap it out with ground organic green pea powder. So we end up with a product that's good for you and good for the planet. And you'll see that across every single wine that we make, but it's particularly challenging to do it for rosé. So why don't we take a little taste? See if you can see how long it lasts in the palate. Most rosés, they're very pretty, but then they're little like soap bubbles, poof, they're gone. And so putting back that structure, that length, into the rosé without using chemicals, that's a very big challenge, and we were very excited to find a way through it. Take our next wine, which is the Viognier. So for those of you who have the Viognier, you may smell that very distinctive aroma on the nose. Now Viognier is something that most of you may associate with a very intense smell, very aromatic, and some people love it or some people hate it. It's a bit like Marmite. So what we tried to do here is use our altitude, which is so defining, greater freshness, greater acidity, much brighter on the nose than a typical Southern Rhone wine, because we have lots of sun, but we also have those cool nights, and have the sticky texture, but also that much more restrained, elegant aromatic that you associate with the Northern Rhone, which is the world capital of Viognier. Condrieu is the town that is most closely associated with Viognier, and most people in a blind tasting would think of it as that. So as we take a little sip of it, think of that with some lovely foods like you know, summer salads. It's a very, very lovely wine to pair with a lot of things. It's one of our crowd pleasers, the ones that don't have this ring around them. Now I'm going to go on to Aglio. So if you can take a look at Aglio, and Brian, maybe you can put some pairing suggestions in to the feed if you don't mind. For Aglio, I'm trying to get this very multi-layered wine, very complex in terms of the aromatic structure. So a lot of people who don't taste wine for a living find it hard to understand the notion of structure. They can understand it in music, in literature, in architecture, but when you talk about structure on wine, it's a bit of an abstract thing. So this is a perfect wine to practice your understanding of that concept of structure. What I mean is that as you smell it, you can hopefully get a very aromatic nuance of the fruit first, then it's going to roll out into flowers, then it's going to roll out into lovely warm oak smells. And then as it ages, it also gets these layers of complexity that are like forest mulch. Some of you may have had some old white Burgundies. That's very similar to how you would get on a white Burgundy, that you keep the fruit and you keep getting complexity. So this is the first wine that put us on the map. This is the first wine that got the critics to stop and say like, whoa, what's going on there? Who are these people who think they can just show up in the middle of nowhere and start making Grand Cru quality? And then when they had this wine, they started to really understand that this was all about this very particular terroir. So great wine to have with complicated things to pair. If you ever have a dish that's really complicated, truffles or asparagus or artichokes, Aglio is a great wine for that. And it's a great, great wine to practice your smelling skills. I'm going to take you to the family of reds, and we're going to try Astrolabe first. So Astrolabe in real life was the son of Abelard and Eloise. So you can see here, these are our flagship reds. This is one of the, I wanted to show this to you, by the way, because this rock is from the seabed that's way up in the mountains. It's the size of a dinner plate, and it shows you all the great fossils that we have where we are, which is part of why we get a really lovely mineral finish on the wines. So Eloise and Abelard, the mama and papa, and this one is their son. Different price point, easy drinking, lots of Grenache base, so 75% with 25% Syrah, but also super spicy. I don't know if you can get that coming through for those of you who have it. The Garrigue, great Thursday night wine, right? In the wine trade, we say Thursday night wine is that everyday drinking wine. You just have it with your regular daily food. And because of the big Grenache base, it's going to go very well with food pairing. Grenache is the most food-friendly grape across the board. So it's going to be the easiest to pair with a lot of everyday food. So this is the only wine we make that doesn't have any barrel work. And I hope you'll find it has some lovely spice and Garrigue. Everyone knows the word Garrigue. That's the term for all that famous vegetation around the property, which is in the south of France, the thyme, the rosemary, the lavender, the lovely essential oils. Hopefully you're getting some whiffs of that because we work so closely on sustainability with that microbiome. Now quickly on Abelard and Eloise, what I like to do is to get these two wines side by side if you can. If you have two glasses and you can go back and forth between them, I think that's always the funnest way to try them. So this one, Eloise, is the, this one is the Syrah with some Grenache, Eloise, Grenache with some Syrah, Abelard. So yin and yang wines to showcase that duality we talked about. The fact that it's very far south, so it's got that lovely, rich, mouth-filling Grenache, but it's very high up, giving it elegance and finesse. So this one is to showcase the elegance, the Eloise, And the Abelard is to showcase that opulence. And together they go really well as a pair. You can have them separately, but if you're having a dinner party, it's really fun to get 2 bottles, instead of 2 bottles of the same wine, 1 of each, and then a little bit of the Viognier, that lovely white wine that goes into the Eloise blend in the Northern Rhone, and gives it that little perfume. And on this vintage that you're trying today, we have switched for the first time into using Roussanne. Now Roussanne, which you had some when you had that wine, Alio, has got that fabulous, rich, beautiful perfume, and it's also got a lovely texture in the mouth. So the idea of putting white wine into a red wine is because Northern Rhone style Syrahs like this can be very austere, very, very firm in their tannins, and that lovely perfume from the white wine comes in handy. And the last wine, which is Abelard, you can tell even on the nose, these are just reverse blends, and yet they're very different even on the nose. They're from the best part of the vineyard, and they're the ones that got us all the awards around the world and the top ratings from critics and all that stuff that has been essential for us, because I cannot tell you how hard it is to show up as a new property, as a disruptor on the wine scene, where everybody has been doing everything a certain way for centuries, and then you have to elbow your way into that group of people where they all know each other and all of that, and it takes a while to really earn your marks. So the best thing for us was to put these blind into top tastings with top critics, and then see them coming away every time with the top prizes, and that's been really helpful to us. The last one then, which is really supposed to be concentrated and opulent, but not the alcohol levels that you typically think of when you think of the south of France. So for example, we have, because we have so much wind here, the famous Mistral, which is the famous wind of the south, you have an opportunity to get a fantastic concentration from wind instead of from sun, because the concentration that comes from sun is going to bring the heaviness from the alcohol. So that is a huge advantage of being up here at the top of the mountain. And nowadays, winemakers are scouring the globe to find properties that are very high up, but also have that lovely sunshine. So for food, I like to say Eloise likes feathers and Abelard likes fur. Feathers, white meats, things that are, with more delicate flavors. Brian can put some of his favorite pairing suggestions there because he's a great cook. And then Abelard, when I say fur, I mean gamey, salty, spicy, greasy, or fatty, shall we say, smoky, all those lovely concentrated flavors that need a more concentrated wine to stand up to them. So by putting these 2 glasses, 1 bottle of each, you will make everyone in your group much happier than if you try to choose one wine that's kind of neither here nor there. So I'm finished with the wine tasting, but I wanted to just take you back 1 second as we're taking our Q&A to the last thing, which is the label. Some of you may have noticed the label has many hidden symbols in it. If you ordered the wines, or if you've seen these wines before, you'll see there's like 50 different symbols in here. And I could be here for 4 hours showing you all the hidden symbolism, of which there's so much, because we have everything from the top philosophers, thinkers, writers, there's Voltaire, there's Picasso, there's Raphael, there's Cicero, all sorts of exciting things. And I know some of you studied all sorts of exciting things when you were at Columbia, and I went to Vassar, and one of the things they taught us there, which I'm sure they did with you as well, one of the privileges of these American universities is to see connections between many areas of thought. And I never really knew what that meant, and I never really knew why that was a huge advantage until I started working on this project, and suddenly it became very clear that there was an opportunity to connect all these different areas of thought. But just to finish, there's a fun little bunny hunt that's hiding in here. So you may see here They're 5 little white rabbits. I'll try to get you a bit closer to see if I can show you any of them. They're hiding in the bushes, they're hiding around in the vineyard, etc. And those little white rabbits are a symbol for the work that we do with the ecology. So as you remember, because we're in the heart of a UNESCO biosphere, we manage this very complex biodiversity. And when you do that, and you have scientists coming here to count all the diversity of the animals, etc., by counting your rabbit population, they're halfway in the ecosystem between those big predators and then the small stuff. And it's a quick shorthand for all the work that we try to do in biodiversity. Okay, so the one thing I wanted to leave us with is if you find them all, please get in touch. We will arrange to send you the little prize and welcome you into this international bunny club. And when I say the bunny club, it's a fun way for me to thank you for paying attention to this small vineyard and understanding, you know, taking the time to understand all the exciting stuff. One of the things I've always learned around the world is that the people who come to a wine tasting for a wine that they haven't heard of before, there's such a triage. It means that by definition, they have intellectual curiosity, the desire to question what they already know, the wanting to know about the new things, the new people, the new projects emerging, instead of always sticking to the famous things or the things that are already established. And as we all know, that's always an indication of a certain kind of person with a very open mind and the kind of person that in the long term really goes forward and makes an impact on whatever they do professionally or in their community or in their personal lives. So I always have a natural affinity for the people who spend the time getting to know these wines, because I know we already share a certain intellectual curiosity, which I think is one of the lovely spices of life. So on that happy note, be happy to open up to Q&A. I was going a little bit fast because I thought all of you have such different backgrounds, you might have picked up on different things we talked about for a bit of a deep dive in something that was particularly interesting to you. And now hopefully I piqued your curiosity about some of those things, and you can ask a few more detailed questions on things that you might care about. Any volunteers?
Well, I have a question if nobody else has one, maybe to get the conversation going. I don't want to take anyone else's thunder. So in the very beginning, we saw the chêne bleu, the blue oak tree. What inspired you to take that tree and actually turn it into something almost like a work of art?
That's funny because unfortunately, one of the things that always characterizes how I work is that I do a ton of research on things, and then it takes me forever to come up with the right thing and calibrate everything. So we were going around in circles trying to make a, find the right name for this property. And with my brother-in-law, sister-in-law, my husband, we had lots of ideas, but we couldn't really agree with each other. So I don't know if you've ever had that in your family, but you want to make everybody happy, and you're afraid to end up with the famous camel is the horse designed by the committee. So we had all this tug of war, and one day we decided to do for all of our friends around the world a big competition. And we said, anyone who can come up with a name for this winery, here's the spec. We will shower you with a huge prize. It was several thousand dollars at the time, and we'll be grateful to you forever. And in fact, we did get hundreds of submissions from all over the world, from all these people we knew who put a few names in the pot. And then we sat down and went through all those names, and we still couldn't agree, and no one's short list matched up with anything. And finally, that same weekend, I went down with my husband to see the bees in the apiary, and we came across this you know, the oak tree that had just been painted with the copper sulfide. And I looked up at it while he was working on his bees. And I said, wait a minute, you know, why don't we call it the blue oak? It would be such a perfect symbol because it represents the history, the authenticity, the natural beauty of the place, and our philosophy, which is not to change that, but just to kind of shape it and make it a little bit edgy and sort of enhance reality and not kind of come in from the outside and impose a completely different reality on the place. And so he looked up at me and he's like, oh my God, that's perfect. What a great idea. Let me do that. And then we went to see his brother-in-law and sister-in-law, and we proposed it to them thinking they would shoot it down. And they were like, oh my God, that's perfect. What a great idea. And in 10 minutes, we solved this thing, which took us, you know, 5 years of bickering with each other. But I think it's proof of something else that you might all know, which is this idea that he who has long, is a translation from a French expression. He who has long sought without finding, he who finds without seeking has long sought without finding. There, that's the translation. And I think that when you can, let's say you're looking for an apartment or something, and you know you have to see 50 places to be able to walk into one and be like, bam, that's the one for me, right? So that was our experience. Michael, are you saying something? You're muted.
No, I apologize. I have a group here, so we're just doing a tasting as well. I apologize.
Okay, great. Do we have any other questions?
About any feedback on the wines that you tried? Anybody have any comments on the wines?
Oh, I saw that there's a question here about primeur tastings. So certainly for the primeur, it's interesting question because historically the Rhone has not been invited to the table for the primeurs, right? That has been a lot of Bordeaux historically and some Burgundy. And then slowly, they've been adding satellite regions and satellite wineries that are kind of hand-picked. So you can't just rock up and be part of the primeur, it's sort of by invitation only. And so in the Rhone, it was the kind of most famous names that you're probably familiar with. And then they had the Super Tuscans that came along. And we were very honored that last year, for the first time, we were invited into the primeur, even though we had only been releasing wines for 10 years. So that was an important moment for us. So there's another question about 19. So 19 in the Rhone was a very good vintage. You're absolutely right. And in particular, for us, we only have our rosé available in 19 because, of course, the other ones are late release. I didn't mention to you, but we often hold on to our top reds for 7 or 8 years before we release them, a bit like Vega Sicilia, because it gives us a chance to really build them to last with a lovely oak backbone, and then it integrates. And so, yes, I would recommend the 19s in the region. It is one of the lovelier vintages. It was a small vintage for us, which was frustrating, but it is a good one. Any other questions?
Also a question from Douglas about our wine program, our wine school.
Ah, yes, lovely. And I see that Douglas loves Rhone wines. That's great news. And absolutely, the wine school is very important for us because we wanted to make this place into a real hub of innovation, of experimentation, of collaboration. And people come from all over the world to work here. We're very open. We don't have this attitude of just like, oh, we have been doing this thing for this 17th generation. We are not going to change anything. It's all about that kind of listening to each other and learning from each other. And so the wine school is an extension of that. As I went around the world, I met so many people who, like me, when I converted to winemaking from finance and think tanks, became, wanted to really dig in there. I mean, again, anyone who's gone to Colombia, we're accustomed to be thrown into the deep end of the pool, assimilate lots of information, but we want really good instructors, really well-structured program, and then we're kind of like, bring it on. And one of the frustrating things I found was that a lot of the wine schools for enthusiasts were really targeted at people who wanted to have what I would call edutainment, which is lovely. Edutainment is great, and we all need it, and we all need the relaxation. But still, there's always somebody in every group who, when they want to learn something, they want to do it right. They want to really have their time and their money and their attention used in the most logical, well-structured, challenging, but enjoyable way. And so that is how Extreme Wine was born. The Extreme Wine course, it's 5 days, full immersion, not for the faint of heart. You have to roll up your sleeves and be prepared to take on lots of wine knowledge, but you have 2 certifications at the end, the WSET intermediate level and a proprietary degree. It's taught by Clive Barlow, who's chairman of education at the Institute of Masters of Wine, unbelievable instructor, and Nick Demerg, who also, after the Master of Wine program, he's originally from New Zealand, but he was living in Hong Kong and Singapore. Some of you may have met him. He's a terrific instructor. And between the 2 of them, just like in those investment banks, they have more than 60 years of wine teaching experience. They're absolutely extraordinary instructors and lots of fun. So people come from around the world, and it's very intense because there are these 2 exams at the end, but we have a 100% pass rate because we work individually with people to make sure that they're completely ready for the exams, and then they can tailor-make part of the program to their interests, whether it's a deep dive on a certain region, whether it's improving their tasting skills, whether it's improving their, wine, talking about wine, whatever it is that's interesting to them, there's a custom component as well. So what I can do with Michael is arrange something where anybody who comes through this, the Columbia network, or who got the email today,
Sure.
can come on in very privileged special conditions.
And we'll also share any links you may have with those who are unable to join. So happy to spread the word.
Any questions? Would you like to hear two more things about this sustainability? Oh, sorry, Mary?
Yeah, I do have a question. You had mentioned that the wines are chemical free and biodynamic. Does that mean it's free of sulfites?
So that's a super great question, okay? This gets into the heart of one of the things that drives most wine consumers crazy, is that right now there's this big battle raging between organic, biodynamic, natural, and now there's this kind of umbrella thing, which is sustainable, which in my view is the least ideological and the most factually based of all of them, because there are lots of distortions in the system between those 3. All 3 of those 3 schools of trying to do the right thing get quite hung up on things that, in my opinion, may or may not be the real issues that are at stake here. So sometimes you have to take 1 step back to take 2 steps forward. And I think the consumers are becoming a bit resentful of how much time and energy they're having to spend just waking up in the morning saying, okay, I want to drink something that I know someone's worked hard for it to be good for me and good for the planet, where I'm not drinking a bunch of plastics or chemicals, and when I know that these people are preserving and protecting the land. And so having looked at all these issues, there are a lot of faux battles going on, in my opinion, working with some of the top scientists around the world, like Claude Denis de Bourguignon, who are the great microbiologists of the world and things like that. And, the question of sulfites is a very important question that, in my opinion, is dangerous, because there's a reason why people use sulfites. It's not sulfites per se that are dangerous. It's the amount of sulfites that you use, because they can poison the earth. And if you dump a bunch of anything into the earth, it's like vitamins, right? If you take a little bit of vitamin B or something, it's great for you, and if you take way too much, it becomes poison, right? Now, the reason for sulfites is that you have a real risk of microbiological spoilage in wine. Very dangerous, because it is naturally going to, with time, be prone to microbiological activity. So you have to make a choice. You either drink something that has a possibility of spoiling and being genuinely lethal if the spoilage is, extensive, can be fatal to you, Or you can put a little bit of something in just the right amount that is going to prevent that spoilage, but not poison your product or have the long-term effects. So I believe that that sulfites have been very over demonized, and one of the dangers of that is that it takes the conversation away from the real bad stuff, which is the crazy fact that in most countries, you know, it's starting to change, thank God, a bit in Europe, the authorized use of these absolutely shocking Roundup and, you know, Monsanto, all this stuff, all the lobbying, we all know about it. It's really time for that to change. And we all know about the politicians and what their agendas are. It's true in every field. It's only going to change when consumers become more educated and more vocal about saying to people, cut it out, guys. You can't do this anymore. It's our planet too. Stop it. And so there's a real problem going on, which is this enormous lobbying in Brussels and in Washington by huge and very well-funded agro-industrial groups. And that time, I think it's, you know, basta, you know, enough. It's time to stop that. And so going back to the sulfite question, in summary, I would say, I've really looked carefully into this question because we're so fanatic about conservation and all that. I think sustainability is the proof in the pudding, right? Anytime you're doing anything that is disrupting your environment, killing your microorganisms, killing your nature, you know, nature will give you very clear signals right back at you, right? So by using cover crops, like, so this project, and let me just say one thing about it because it's very exciting and it's very groundbreaking. And just last night, we had a major meeting here with these 4 world scientists. I love that. Hello. Hello. That's that cute animal. Hello. What a gorgeous dog. From around the world. So we had UC Davis, University of Sussex, Colonie de Bourguignon, and the National Institute for Research on Agriculture and Ecology. And these scientists are working with us on a project, and I recently heard that Colombia has a very fantastic earth program as well. So I'm going to be inviting them into this project to collaborate with us. Is we are looking to find an alternative to the use of chemicals. People use chemicals for a reason. Winemakers are subsistence farmers. They're not going to go out and buy stuff just for the sake of spending lots of money, whether it's barrels or chemicals, right? But they're obviously responding to a need, and they're afraid of weaning their vineyard off of chemicals because they're using those chemicals as fertilizers, pesticides, etc., right? So you can't just take it away from them without giving them a roadmap of how to manage their vineyard sustainably. So we have this theory that we hope is going to be not just validated by the work that we're doing, but also adopted first at the European level and hopefully worldwide, which is that we believe there's a way to use bees to make better wine. So the idea is the bees, of course, vines are quite self-pollinating. They may or may not need bees. You can bump your yields about 30% apparently by using bees, but you can also fertilize your vineyard on its own. But if you use those bees to develop cover crops between your rows, you move away from monoculture. So immediately we know that's very good for the environment. And the cover crops become a fantastic habitat, a necessary habitat for the microbiome. Now, all of you know, whether you're doctors or you just care about your own health or whatever, the role of microbiome is so important. And that microbiome is not just being explored, just like the, you know, space was in the whatever 70s and the underwater. We're just discovering now a whole new sub-universe of elements in our planet. So those microbiomes in the soil, the diversity and the quantity of them are going to be crucial to figuring out how much you can transmit the terroir. Everyone knows the microbiome is what breaks down that soil and transmits it into nutrients that are absorbable by the plants, by the vines. And in the process of supporting and nourishing the vines, they're also transmitting the sense of place. Now, anyone who has studied even a little bit of wine knows that the joy of fine wine is all about that sense of place, that terroir, that armchair traveler who gets to taste all these different places in the same way they get to see pictures of them, and that helps them to transport themselves there, right? So that microbiome is crucial. So then we have a chain where bees bring the cover crops, bring the microbiome, and transmit the sense of place. And it seems to us like such a win-win situation to then support the bee population. Everyone now on the planet knows how important those are, and make better wine, and not use chemicals, and save money. What's there not to like?
Oh, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Nicole? If not, I'd like to give a big thank you to Nicole and team. I mean, a lot of preparation went into this. We've done many wine tastings, and this was by far the most interesting, interactive. We really appreciate that you had Brian and team on the ground there at Camille to do a tour of the facilities, and we hope to do future events and hopefully to see the property in person.
That's incredibly lovely of you to say, Michael. Thank you. But I do encourage you, you know, our motto here is at the bottom of the bottle and the label you may have seen, it says, non mihi non tibi sed nobis. Any Latin majors might know that means not mine, not yours, but ours. And that is very much how we think and how we collaborate with people. So anyone who has ideas or it's not just visiting, it's not just learning wine, any ways that we can interact, help you guys out, you know, welcome you or your friends, anything we can do, we love that kind of connectivity. And I need to apologize to you on behalf of my husband. I got a text from him saying he is absolutely devastated. He keeps trying to get back on, but he cannot get his Wi-Fi to work. So one of the things that he was looking forward to doing today is to, you know, shoot the breeze with anybody who's interested more generally about, you know, where the world is going. He spends lots and lots of time like making like a giant puzzle of the world, figuring out, you know, what Russia's going to do next, or China, or we all want to know what China's doing next, I'm sure, and the US and all of that stuff. And so people who are interested in connecting back with him in that context, please get in touch. Either send an email, you know, put a comment now, or send an email to Brian or to me. Have you put our emails in there, Brian? And get in touch with me, and we can all get together over a virtual Zoom and shoot the breeze about the future of the world.
There was one question from Douglas, going back to the cover crops. Again, want to know if we plant roses or other fragile plants
Yes,
as a barometer for how.
We sure do. In fact, you can even see them in our label. So you need lots of things. It's like the bunnies. You need lots of ways. Well, at the end of the vines here, we do have our little roses. You may see them. And that is a fantastic way to check on aphids because aphids can be devastating to vines. And aphids will show up first on the roses. So it's a very quick way to start dealing with the program. And then we're working with Dave Goulson. You can look him up. He's a world famous specialist on cover crops. And he's done some work on vineyards specifically, but again, cover crops, super exciting area because it's the cover crops that are going to allow you to have a very healthy, you know, have very healthy crops now. So they're really trying to find ways to maximize the use of wildflowers, because wildflowers in particular don't just help the vines, but they also attract the bees. So you have specific programs of what you plant between the rows to work with the local ecology, but favor the development of your ecosystem.
Any other questions from the group?
Any thoughts about the wines? Did you guys like the wines? Like any of the wines? Like all of the wines?
I like all of them, yeah.
Love to know what you thought. I hope you saw the common denominator around them. You saw the mineral finish, the texture, the freshness, and the ageability, even if they have different styles, different flavor profiles, that there was something that brought them all together, that you're kind of tasting this very special little natural amphitheater that we're in.
We were all just saying, Mary, myself, Mark, that maybe we can organize a CAA Asia trip to the vineyard in the future. Hopefully.
Oh my goodness, I would love that so much. Total VIP red carpet for you guys. You could not have been more lovely. You're exactly my kind of people, doing interesting things and having lots of interesting involvements. Michael was telling me about the backgrounds of a lot of you. And I also see Eric Bagot there from Singapore, who you may know as well. But I have a really lovely mix of people on the call today, and I really hope to meet you all in person, because like everyone, I hope we'll be able to travel soon. I travel constantly, as you can imagine. I have to bang on lots of pots and pans to tell people that we're here and what we're doing, because when you're small and new, no one's going to do it for you. And that's something that I learned in America. I grew up for many years in Italy. And certainly when you study in America, as everybody else did, you learn that you learn to kind of design your destiny, not wait for everybody else to do things for you, but feel responsible for your own outcomes. And sometimes here in France, there's a bit of a learning curve, because culturally that's not always as common. And so I'm trying to bring that culture also to this property and to the people who work here. So I hope that that's another thing that we all share in common. So if you ever do buy these wines, let us know, please. Always drop us a line, because we have this fun system to give you these little, what we call blue acorns. They're little friendship points for anyone around the world, whoever buys the wines from wherever, whether it's restaurants, whether it's retailers. We love to know the people that we know are buying and drinking the wines. And then with these little points, all sorts of good things happen to you, and you get little surprises from us, and you get all sorts of nice ways that we try to come up with to say thank you.
Great. Well, we appreciate that. I know I can see on, at least from the camera, Mark, Matthew, Sean, and myself, there are a few tastings going on tonight. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to support in the future.
Oh, thank you. That's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Well, it was really enjoyable to be with you. Thank you so much for your time. And don't hesitate to get in touch with us. And cheers to you. I want to.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you, Brian, Nicole, Camille. Appreciate everyone.
Grand plaisir. Santé, as we say in France. Santé.
Santé.
And à bientôt. See you soon.
Okay. Thank you again, everyone. Thanks for
Au
joining.
revoir. Merci.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.